Hi everyone, this is Lance Goodpaster, Superintendent of the Franklin Pierce School District. Thank you for watching this video. I'm going to share with you an update on our current budget and our budget forecast moving forward. We have some challenging decisions to make here in the near future for the 24-25 school year and beyond. And I'm going to share with you the reasons for those challenges. But first of all, I'd like to start by thanking you all, staff members who are tuning in. Thank you for everything you do every day on behalf of our students and educating our students. Very much noticed and appreciated by me, but also by our community. And to parents and community members tuning in, thank you as well. Thank you for trusting us with your children, and thank you for all the ways that you partner with us as we're doing our best to educate and provide first-class education for our students. So I've got three goals for this presentation. First is for you all to understand or have a basic understanding of how schools in the state of Washington are funded. I then want you all to have a basic understanding of our current specific Franklin Pierce School District budget forecast and some of the specific challenges that we're facing. The third purpose is for you to understand what our process is going forward to making those budget-related decisions. And then the fourth bullet here on the slide is just an opportunity and an invitation for you all to consider sharing some feedback with us to help us inform us as we're making those decisions. So this first slide is titled Franklin Pierce Schools Budget 101. So these are the basics. The pie graph here shows three main forms of revenue that the school districts in the state of Washington receive. It's not all-encompassing. There are some specific funds that come to us that are not included in this overall pie. For example, the bond that we passed in 2016 brought us revenue specific to building facilities. Those dollars cannot be used for other purposes, so they're set aside for the purpose of this demonstration, this explanation. So if you'll take a look at this slide, you'll see that roughly 72% of the revenues that we receive in any given year come from the state of Washington. Those revenues that the state collects via taxes. So the state's primary responsibility is to fund public education, and public education makes up almost half of the state's budget, and it makes up almost 3/4 of our budget. But it's not enough. So every 4 years or so, we ask you, taxpayers, community members, to pass a levy. And those levy dollars are to make up the difference between what the state funds and what we truly need to adequately serve your students and educate your students. The final section of this pie is the federal dollars that we receive. Roughly 15% of our income this school year comes from the federal government. Those are for specific services with some very explicit ways that we can spend those money. Title I is one major source of revenue that the federal government provides, and those are for intervention services that we provide students. The last handful of years, the federal government has also provided dollars in the form of pandemic relief. So you may have heard the acronym ESSER, but COVID pandemic relief funds that have flowed directly to the school districts since 2021 during the pandemic, and dollars that we've received these past 2 years post-pandemic. Those dollars have been pretty significant here in Franklin Pierce School District. This year, we'll be spending $5.5 million from those federal pandemic relief dollars as part of our overall operating budget those dollars go away after this school year. So one of the factors of the challenges that we're facing here moving forward is the end of those dollars. We knew the end was coming, but we still need some input as we're planning ahead on making some reductions to adjust for those pandemic dollars. The next slide here is an example of how the state funds our schools. So I'm just going to hop back quickly. So again, 72% of the revenues that we'll be spending this year educating our children come from the state. Those dollars are formula driven. In other words, we tell the state of Washington how many students we have. The state takes that number, plugs it into a formula, and then sends us funds based on those numbers that it conceivably will take to educate our children. The formula is outdated and doesn't meet all the needs of our district. For example, we've created a slide here to show how our nurses are funded by the state of Washington. So if you'll take a look at the chart here, you can see there's 3 columns: elementary, middle, and high school. So there's a formula for how many nurses the school district receives funds for from the state of Washington based on the number of students that we have. We've rounded off here, we've rounded up a little bit, so if in a school year, if we were to have had 7,200 students this year, based on this formula, and I'm not going to go through every square on this formula, you can look at it for yourself, but the bottom line is, if you look down to the bottom right-hand corner, based on the formula, the state provides funding for us to hire 1.215 nurses. We have 14 schools, and we have health room staff at each of those schools, not full-time at some of our smaller schools like Gates Alternative School, but 14 total nurses in the district. The state provides funding for a little more than one of those 14. So your local levy dollars makes up the gap. And recently, the past couple of years, those pandemic relief ESSER dollars have made up the gap. You could plug just about any position into a chart like this from the state funding formula, and you'll see a gap. It exists for classroom teachers, for principals, for custodial staff, counselors, psychologists, you name it. The state funding formula doesn't adequately provide what we need. That's why we run a levy every 4 years. And we're not alone. This isn't a Franklin Pierce thing. This is all school districts in the state of Washington rely on levy dollars. The other impact on our budget is the student enrollment. So I mentioned earlier that enrollment, one of the factors that drives school funding. We tell the state of Washington how many students we have. They in turn use that number to calculate the money, the revenue to send us. We have fewer students now in our school district than we had prior to the pandemic. And this chart demonstrates that. Back in 2015, 2016, we had roughly 7,500 students that we get funded for. There are some students that we don't receive complete funding for. If a student is a full-time Running Start student, for example, we don't receive full funding for those students. Those go to the colleges. But you can see by this chart, in the school year 2018-19, we had almost 7,800 students that we received funding for. And that number has declined since the pandemic. The following year on the chart, 2019-20, that's when schools shut down in March. The numbers on this graphic were taken in the spring of each of these years, and so you saw that that year of the pandemic, we started to see a reduction in enrollment, and the 3 years since that 2020 shutdown, we've seen lower numbers than we had prior to the pandemic. Lower numbers means lower revenue from the state. This year, we anticipated seeing 7,300 students this fall. In reality, we have 7,000. The 300 student difference is almost $3 million in revenue that we won't see. We predicted 7,300 students based on counting all students from last year in grades kindergarten through 11th, rolling them forward a grade, and then plugging in a kindergarten number of 550. That's roughly the number of students that we've seen historically here in the Franklin Pierce School District. And we've fallen almost 100 kindergarten students shy of that number. We're at about 460 now. That's 90 students fewer in kindergarten than we anticipated, and fewer students in the other grade levels as well. So the ESSER dollars going away and fewer students enrolled in our school district have contributed to less revenue coming in. So I'm going to share with you some more slides that indicate or show some impacts on our overall budget. This funding slide demonstrates a little bit of what I've already shared. So there are three main sources of revenue, and this is just another way to show it in a bar graph over time. The red is what we receive from the state. The black is what we receive from our local taxpayers. Blue is our traditional federal dollars in form of Title I dollars, and then the yellow is the COVID relief, the dollars that we've just seen these past handful of years. And you can see the red bars have slightly gone down during these times of lower student enrollment, but our overall funding has gone up. That's because of the COVID relief dollars, but also our levy dollars have been relatively high the past couple of years. You all probably have noticed paying higher taxes on your real estate these past couple of years. That's resulted in our collecting more. That's starting to change, as hopefully you've seen, and again, those ESSER dollars are going away. So during a time of lower enrollment, we have not had to reduce staff, and that's been very intentional. It's been challenging in our schools returning from the pandemic, and we've been very intentional in not wanting to reduce staff even though our overall student enrollment has gone down. We've had the funds to maintain that staffing level. That's one of the reasons the federal government provided the ESSER dollars, and so we've taken advantage of that and continued to maintain high levels of staffing. This bar graph shows that in terms of the types of staff that we have. Certificated folks, those are mostly classroom or mostly teachers. The black bar in the middle, those are administrators, and then blue are the classified staff that we employ. So we've maintained high levels of staff despite lower enrollment in our schools. And staff wages over time have gone up. So not only are we maintaining high levels of staff, but the cost of those staff are certainly higher than they were 8-9 years ago, and as they should be. This is not a negative slide in any sense of the word. Wages have gone up in line with inflation. So, but the impact on the budget is it costs more to employ folks now than it did in the past. And this next bar graph is just another way to demonstrate that. So again, we've maintained high levels of staff. The staffing that the number of staff that we've maintained are more expensive to employ because cost of living has increased. We have really high quality benefits as public educators, but those also cost. And so we have spent more and are spending more on wages than we did pre-pandemic. And then finally, this is the last graphic I'll share with you, I promise. This is a graphic that demonstrates our ending fund balance. So school districts are required to keep a fund balance of at least 5% of the previous year's expenditures. That's a requirement that our school board has. So part of our board policy is a minimum 5% fund balance. Most school districts are right around that same place. Historically, we've had a much higher fund balance, but as enrollment has gone down and wages and salaries have increased, our fund balance has decreased as well, to the point where we are now right at that 5% mark. The fund balance is measured, if you will, at the end of each fiscal year. The school district's fiscal year runs September 1 through August 31st, so it's the amount left in our bank account on October 31st that becomes the fund balance. And the reason there's a 5% cushion there is so that we can be flexible enough to handle and deal with unforeseen circumstances, such as a decline in enrollment that was unexpected. So the fund balance is at its minimum, and in fact will be slightly below 5% at the end of this fiscal year because of our low enrollment, and we need to make adjustments because of that. So this next slide, we're moving away from graphics now. This just gives a current budget outlook based on because of the information that I've shared through those slides. So on the left here, these numbers are from the budget that we passed back in July. Our school board every June and July receives a proposed budget from me, the superintendent, and this past July's budget that was adopted was based on a projection of 7,300 students, as I mentioned. It includes $5.5 million of federal relief COVID dollars. It's shared there in red, and those dollars are going away after this year. You can see more details from the budget that we passed in July. Expected income of $149 million. That includes all of those buckets of money: the state revenue, the local levy dollars, and the federal government. We had anticipated spending $147 million, almost $148 million in expenses, and planned for an ending fund balance of almost $8 million, which is slightly over 5%. The enrollment reality of 7,000 students instead of 7,300 means those dollars change by roughly $2.9 million. The ESSER dollars, still $5.5 million that we're receiving this year from the federal government and will be put to good use. But we have $2.9 million less revenue coming in from the state than we anticipated. Because of the fund balance, we have the cushion to handle that $2.9 million change, but we have to make an adjustment moving forward. So for the 24-25 school year, we need to adjust our budget by both that $2.9 million loss in revenue because of lower enrollment and the $5.5 million that are going away that the federal government has been providing for the last handful of years, meaning an overall correction of $8.4 million. Now we've already started taking steps to make adjustments to reduce that number. So when we realized this fall we had 300 fewer students than we anticipated, we had to collapse some classes. So some teachers who were planning to teach in the classroom this fall were moved to other placements. That saved initial funds in that those positions that the teachers were moved to, we didn't have to hire from the outside. So we've already taken some steps toward this, making this $8.4 million correction, but there's still much more to do. And so how are we going to do that? We currently have a budget advisory task force meeting 2 to 3 times a month. We've already met 3 times. We'll be meeting next week. We'll be meeting again on November 20th, and then on Mondays through the end of November, December, and through January. That team is comprised of association leads, parents, principals, district level administrators, myself included. Our task is to present a budget to the school board in February of 2024. February is much earlier than we typically present a budget. It won't be the finalized and formal budget, but it will be a very clear presentation to the board on where the $8.4 million will be adjusted. The reason we're doing that in February is so then we have the rest of the spring to make whatever adjustments we need to make. We also have an enrollment task force meeting regularly to examine where those 800 students went, and so that we can plan accordingly and be proactive in the future to encourage students and families to stay in public education. We know that this is, Franklin Pierce Schools is the best place for our students to receive education here in the community, and we want to continue to make that known so that families stay and keep their students enrolled. This slide includes a QR code that will take you to maybe the website that you have already found, but a website dedicated to this budget process where you can also provide feedback to us, and I really hope you take the time to do that. Feedback not only on the presentation, was it informative, do you still have questions, but also feedback on what our priorities should be as we look to make some adjustments to our overall budget. We're hopeful that we don't have to engage in a large reduction in force process. We typically have between 120 and 170 employees leave our district each year for a variety of reasons, and that dates well before the pandemic. People retire, people change jobs, people move, people who work here but don't live in our community find work closer to home. So we have some natural turnover, and we plan to take advantage of that as we adjust our budget. But that timeline between February and into the school year allows us to do that. So that's the final slide. That brings us to an end of really this overview on our budget, where we are, how we got to this place, and what we plan to do to make the adjustment. We hope that you provide or take some time to provide us some feedback on ways how we should prioritize our process, and look forward to engaging you in the future. If you have any questions, please use the information on the budget website to ask those questions. But you can also just send me an email or pick up the phone and call the district office. I'm happy to engage and answer questions in any way I can. We'll get through this. This is something that other districts are dealing with as well. If you follow the news at all, you've seen several school districts in our region, in our state, who are making adjustments in light of the things that I just shared. So with that, again, I thank you for listening. I appreciate all that you do, whether you're staff or community members, for our students, and we'll get through this together. Thank you.